I had a friend contact me with a terrible story. They had a very close relative who recently passed. One of the things that most reminded them of the relative was a lawnmower. Now I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but this mower has a lot of sentimental value to my friend. The worst part was that it ended up getting taken from the shed it was in, only to be found about a year later, and I hate to say it, but they didn't treat it very well, leaving it outside for most of that time. Hopefully their poor treatment didn't do any permanent damage to it. What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by. Today's project is this John Deere lawnmower, and the problem is that it was stolen and left outside and exposed for around a year. So I've got to figure out if we can save this mower after it's been rained and snowed on. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, however, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, we're only going to mention what these other options could be. We don't have enough time to look into them, but if you need more information on these options, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you need to. The first thing I want to do is to look over it for any obvious issues, and the most obvious issue is the missing front wheel. After talking to my friend, it turns out it wasn't like that before it was taken, so it must have happened while it was on its little vacation. There's not much more we can do to it other than replace it with a new one, which I hate to say is very expensive. Now, I did wonder how they managed to break the front wheel, and I thought they must have been incredibly abusive to it, but after looking at the other front wheel, it's also missing a piece, so more than likely it's going to break in the future as well, so it seems these wheels just break over time. The next thing I want to check is of course the oil's level and condition, and this one was quite surprising to me. After wiping the dipstick clean, I'll then reinsert it to get an accurate reading. So it turns out the oil level is right where I'd want it to be, just under the top mark. The problem is the condition. For some reason the oil is a dark green color. I'm not sure what's going on here because the oil is supposed to be various shades of brown and not green. The ideal color would be a very light golden brown, which would mean it's new, and in the worst case scenario it would be a dark brown. Now if your oil is an extremely dark brown, then you're in desperate need of an oil change. After removing the gas cap to check on the fuel, I don't see anything in there, but on this type of gas tank, if the bottom of the tank is still wet, there's a good chance there's still some fuel in there. We'll drain it later on to see what kind of condition it's in. Next, I'm going to remove the air filter and the cover because I want to try starting it. Since I don't know the condition of the fuel, I'm going to try to manually prime the engine through the carb's throat as well. The air filter is not in terrible shape, but it will need to be replaced at some point. For right now, we should be able to use it for testing. Now, I prefer to use a chemical bottle to put fuel into places like this because I can control it better than using the gas can. If you want to know more about getting one of these, there's a link in the description. So the good news is that it started and ran for a few seconds, so we know the engine has spark and compression. But the bad news is that it didn't stay running on the fuel that's inside the carb. That means we either have a fuel or a carb issue, or maybe even both, and that means we need to investigate both possibilities. The next issue I have is that the pull rope is extremely short, and I can't get the engine to spin over more than 2 or 3 times for each pull. I don't need the rope to be 9 feet long, but another foot would be nice. That means if we get this mower working again, I'd like to restring the recoil. So it's been a few days and I finally got the new wheel in. That means we can remove what's left of the old one and install the new one. I hate to say it, but this wheel was not cheap. The online price for this thing was $40, which in my book is just too much. Now if this had been my mower, I would probably have found other wheels from a different mower to use instead. The thing I didn't realize was just how big of a wheel it really is. If I had to compare it to another mower, it looks like the size of a commercial Honda mower wheel. I guess that's the reason why it was so expensive. The only issue is that this wheel makes the other wheels look terrible. Before I go on with this repair, I'm going to quickly clean the other wheels. Now the cleaner I'm using is from the dollar store and it's citrus based. I did mix it with some water in a 1-to-1 ratio. The reason I do this is to get the most from the cleaner. If I need to clean some oil, I use a different cleaner that's a lot stronger, but for cleaning wheels and mowing decks, this works just fine. Now the dirtiest wheels are on the rear, and that's from me pushing it around my wet yard. Overall, the wheels came out pretty well, and it should make it a lot less obvious that we replaced the front one. While the mower was on the table, I got a good look at it and I just realized this mower has an aluminum mowing deck. This puts this mower into a new class for me. They wanted this thing to last for a long time and didn't want you to just throw it away after a handful of years. After taking off the drive wheels to service it, I got a good look at the drive gear on the back of the wheel, and although it's made out of plastic, it's designed so you can replace the gear, which is pretty cool. The next thing I'm going to do is clean off some of the extra grease and dirt from the metal drive gear so we can apply new lube to it. After it's clean, I tried to remove the snap ring on the end of the drive shaft, but it was being quite stubborn, so instead I'm going to spray lithium grease on the edge of the gear, which should make its way to the key. I don't have a problem doing it this way, but it just means I'll have to spray more lithium than I normally would. After that, I'll replace the wheel and do the same thing to the other side. Just out of curiosity, I want to remove the spark plug and check its condition. I want to make sure it's a decent brand and that it's not covered in oil or have excessive carbon buildup on it. So it's an NGK spark plug and it's in okay condition. It's not covered in oil, so I don't have a problem putting this one back into the engine. If all possible, I would always use an OEM spark plug, and if not, at least a Champion equivalent. The next thing I'm going to do is to remove the bowl nut, which is also the fuel jet, to make sure it's clear. Now, I was having some issues getting access to it, so I'm going to do something that's going to make some of the viewers cringe a bit, but until I find a tool just for this job, this is going to have to work out for now. I don't want to let all this fuel drain all over the deck, because this would also be a great time to inspect the fuel. Now, I'm going to use this piece of rubber as a slide to help drain the fuel into my pan. Now, the pan does have a little bit of oil in it, but I should be able to figure out if there was an issue with it. And apparently, I didn't have to wait too long. The fuel sliding down the rubber was a consistent stream, but now it's intermittent and it looks a little different. For those of you who know what this is, it's pretty clear, but for those of you who are not sure, this is water coming out of the fuel system. So this is what can happen if you leave your equipment outside with a partially filled fuel tank. The airspace inside the tank allows moisture to build up on the sides of the tank and then condense and slide down the walls and collect at the bottom of the tank. I would either fill up the tank to the top or leave it empty. Once it's pretty much stopped dripping, I'm going to remove the bowl nut and then the bowl so I can inspect it for any issues. Now, there might be some fuel and water left in the bowl, so I'll dump that into the pan as well. After giving it a good wipe down, the bowl looks absolutely fine, which means it hasn't been kept outside for more than a year, which is good news. The next thing I want to look at is the fuel jet. Now, there's an opening on the side, which is typically too large to ever clog, so that's not what we want to look at. It's the opening in the top and the middle, which is most likely to have an issue. Now, to clean the opening, I'm going to use a small wire to clean any debris that might be in there. If you wish to use carb cleaner or compressed air instead, that will work as well. Once I'm satisfied that it's cleared, I'm going to put the carb back together. However, before I do that, I'm going to take this opportunity to clean the grass clippings that are clinging to the underside of the mowing deck. Now, the reason why is because the extra grass can affect the way the mower cuts, mulches, and even bags the grass you're trying to cut. It only takes a few minutes and your lawn will look a lot better. Now, don't forget to sharpen your blades at least once a year as well. You can also use your garden hose to clean off the grass clippings, but it's quite wasteful as you'll need to spray it for a long time. So I got the large clumps of grass off the mowing deck, and to finish off, I'll just brush away any loose bits. If you want to make it spotless, that's up to you, but I think this is more than enough to improve its cutting performance. While I was brushing the grass away, I got a good look at this transmission, and I have to admit it, but this is a very nice 2-speed transmission. The biggest reason is the fact that the case is made out of metal versus plastic. The more I look at this machine, it's starting to remind me more and more of the older Toro Super Recyclers, which has recently become one of my most admired mowers. I'll say this particular John Deere is giving that Toro a run for its money. The next thing I'm going to do is to use air to force out anything that might be left in the tank, and as you can see, even though it had stopped dripping, there's still more water in the tank. After that, I'm going to replace the bowl back onto the carb along with the cleared jet. Just be careful not to over tighten the brass bowl nut, otherwise you could break it. Of course, don't forget to reconnect the fuel line to the tank and then replace the clamp as well. Next, I'm going to put fuel into the tank, and the fuel I'll be using is 89 octane, 100% gasoline, which is of course no ethanol, and it's also been stabilized. Now, after adding fuel to the tank, I'm going to watch the carb for any fuel leaks. Now, after watching for about a minute, I don't see any leaks, so next I'm going to press the bulb a few times and see if it's actually going to prime the engine with any fuel. Now, after pressing it 3 more times, I can see the bottom of the intake get wet with fuel, and just for fun, I'm going to press it a few more times and see if I can put more in there, and as you can see, it definitely seems to be working. After that, I'm going to replace the air filter and its cover and then try starting it. Now, it did take 4 pulls, but eventually it started, so what I think happened was that since I'd pressed the bulb so many times, I basically flooded the engine, and it took a few pulls to clear it. I didn't run the engine for very long, so it's still quite cold. I want to start it again, but this time I'm only going to press the bulb 3 times and see if it starts any better. So this time it only took 2 pulls to get it to start versus the 4 from earlier when I flooded the engine. The best part is that it still sounds great, so its time away didn't seem to hurt it. Now, I might have spoken too soon because we still need to do an oil change, and I hate to say it, but I think you're about to be a bit surprised by what you're about to see. Now, at first, I thought it was a little weird that the oil was moving as slow as it was. The oil should be warm from our 2 test starts, so it should flow faster than this. But as more of it came out, I started to realize this wasn't motor oil. This was something else. Now, if I reposition the camera, you can see that this oil is actually a green color. I know they make some fancy oils out there, but I don't think someone would put AMSOIL or Royal Purple in a lawnmower. If I had to guess, I think this is 2-cycle oil. If you have a guess as to what kind of oil this is, I'd really like to hear about it. Unfortunately, I couldn't get any real confirmation from the owner about the oil they used before it was taken, so I guess I'll never know. So would it be bad to use 2-cycle oil in a 4-cycle engine crankcase? It would work in a pinch, but I wouldn't only use 2-cycle oil in there. Instead, I would cut it with mostly motor oil. The reason is I don't doubt that it's going to lubricate the engine, but I'm worried about how it's going to react inside the engine, as it could start to foam up and then start to evaporate once it gets hot. I never noticed this before, but they printed the amount of oil we need to put in this engine on the dipstick. I wonder how many people never noticed this bit of information before. Now, with that in mind, whatever you do, make sure you put the proper amount of oil into the engine, otherwise it could wear out prematurely. Another option as to why this engine wouldn't start is that the engine is simply too worn out to compress the air-fuel mixture. To test for this, I would use a compression tester, and hopefully the reading is over 100 psi. If it's less than 50, then I doubt the engine will be able to start. Now, to be honest, I really like this mower, and if it didn't mean so much to my friend, I would consider buying it from him because it's not every day that I get impressed by a lawnmower. Hopefully he'll invest in a good lock and some cameras, and hopefully that'll be enough to keep most thieves away. So my question is, in a pinch, would you ever add anything to your engine oil that wasn't motor oil, just to make sure it was at the right level? It could be bar oil, transmission fluid, or something like that. Like I said, if I ever needed an extra ounce of oil, I'm going to go to the store and get more, and I wouldn't be adding anything else to the engine oil that wasn't motor oil. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.